There's a celebration happening right now in a multifamily office somewhere in this country because occupancy is up, the numbers look good, and leadership is super pleased. But 6 months from now, everyone will be confused because retention rates will start to soften, costs will be up, and no one will be connecting the dots. Hi, I'm Mike Brewer, and this is The Intelligence Fabric, a podcast about how intelligence shows up in multifamily. And as it's quickly becoming tradition, let's pull on another thread. Now, most teams are trained to optimize first-order outcomes. Now, you may ask, Mike, what is a first-order outcome? Well, I'm actually really glad you asked. Examples might include leads, leases, occupancy, rents, and renewal rates. You do the direct inputs, and you get immediate results with clear attribution. It feels clean, and it feels like control, but there is a problem. Profits rarely live in first-order effects. They live in what happens next. Okay, so a first-order effect is the immediate result of an action. So you take an action, you get a result. You increase marketing spend, and your leads go up. You raise rents, and it has a positive impact on your NOI. If you reduce service cost inputs, your expenses, by extension, go down. It's all very clear, it's very linear, it's very trackable. But second-order effects are what those actions trigger over time. And that's where the real economics of the system begin to show. Now let's talk about second-order effects. Second-order effects determine whether today's gain becomes tomorrow's loss, or whether efficiency creates resilience or fragility, or whether growth compounds and takes off, or it stalls out and it decreases. They're slower and less visible and hard to measure, which is exactly why most teams ignore them. All right, let's create a simple scenario as an example for first order and second order. You decide to push for higher occupancy, so you increase your marketing spend and your lease conversions start to accelerate. The first order result is that your occupancy rises. It definitely looks like a win, right? But let's not break out the champagne just yet. Higher occupancy means a couple of things. Simple things sometimes. Trash volume increases, service requests increase, demand increases. Your maintenance team gets stretched pretty thin. And the result is their speed to completion in terms of tickets decreases. And that potentially has an impact, second order. Maybe that 5-star average rating that you have starts to decrease because resident experiences are fading off into the sunset. Undone, unkept. 6 months later, your retention rate starts to decrease. Now you're spending again to replace the residents that you just acquired and put in the building. The system is just responding to what it sees. And the response is predictable only if you're watching the second order effects. All right, let's talk about that illusion of success that we just experienced. Here's what makes this very dangerous. First order metrics improve immediately. You can see it very quickly. What follows are the second order consequences, less visible. Organizations always celebrate these early wins, and they diagnose the second order consequences much later. That is to say that by the time the impact shows up in renewals, reputation, and increased expenses, the original decisions feel very distant, disconnected, and very unrelated. That's how value starts to leak out of the system. Sounds like a systems problem to me. Second order effects are simply disconnected, and they're very hard to anticipate. As mentioned, all these signals were there, right? Your service tickets started to increase, the speed to get those tickets resolved started to increase, and the sentiment, resident sentiment, started to shift. You had this 5-star rating, now you have a 4.7-star rating or a 4-star rating. But all these things live in different systems, and they're governed by different teams in different timelines sometimes. So no one sees the correlation. Let's talk about why most models fall short. So most operating models or systems in multifamily optimize for the first order outcome because of something we just talked about. It's just easier to measure. They have clear inputs, clear outputs. The system doesn't behave in a straight line. They actually behave in loops. You have that action that we talked about, then reactions, adjustments, pivots, and then consequences in that kind of a loop. But if your system or your model stops at the first step, that input, you lose your ability to optimize. Now, I think it's fair to say that your internal systems are geared for a financial outcome. Second order effects are those things in which profits either take off, or they stay static, or they go backwards, because they influence things like retention and the lifetime value of a resident, or cost stability, or brand perception. Now, all of those things don't show up immediately, but they do determine long-term performance. That is to say, optimizing in the short term can create long-term drag or long-term leverage. The difference is whether second-order effects are actually understood. Now, let's talk about this from an intelligence fabric perspective. After all, our podcast is called the Intelligence Fabric, so the intelligence fabric actually exists to connect all these effects, to ensure that actions remain linked to outcomes, that your signals remain visible over time, and consequences are surfaced earlier rather than discovered later. When intelligence becomes part of the system, second-order effects are no longer hidden. You have true visibility. They become part of the decision instead of an afterthought. Now, this does carry leadership implications. It changes how a leader operates. It makes them vulnerable. It exposes and creates vulnerability. But if you embrace that, the questions become much more full of insight and much more powerful. Instead of asking questions like, did this work? You can start asking questions like, what will this cause next? That's a different level of thinking. It may seem slower on the front side, but it's exceedingly faster over time. Because before that Monday morning meeting starts, you're not needing to do homework, and you're not needing to do correction, and you're not needing to do theorizing in the moment. Here's the deal. If your organization feels like it's working harder each quarter to maintain the same results, you may not have a performance problem. That is a human person, people performance problem. You may have a second order problem where today's decisions are quietly undermining tomorrow's results or outcomes. So let's get back to that celebration, the one that's happening right now in some multifamily office somewhere in this country where occupancy is up and the dashboards are green across the board. Here's what I hope happens next. Someone in that room asks a second order question. What will this cause 6 months from now? And when they do, they won't be confused later. They'll be prepared. This is the Intelligence Fabric. Thanks for listening.